Yes, ma'am.
We were having a conversation within Neighborhoods Without Borders this morning on this very topic, and we were kind of predominantly white at the meeting this morning, and so we were thinking, well, first of all, we're struggling with how do we get more white people to these meetings in particular. This is the first one where whites actually are in the majority in the year that we've been hosting these. And it's because we're all regular supporters, really. But what, you know, some of the conversation points that came out were that very often whites think that racism is a black problem,
Yes.
and has nothing to do with them, or it doesn't have anything to do with them because they wrote their check already this month.
Well, yeah. I'm not racist, so I don't have to have this.
Right, yeah, I paid
I
the
don't-
money so somebody else can solve the problem for me. You know, and so we were having just really interesting conversations about how do we reach people and explain to them that there's more to be done. That you can't just hold the value that this is wrong and something needs to be done, but you have to act on it. You have to help make the change, right? And so I would also say if anybody has ideas for us, we've got some ideas rolling, but we're looking for ideas on this subject. But I love that approach because it doesn't it's not victimization, and it isn't you're wrong because.
And it's not placing the onus for fixing racism on people of color, because we can't. Actually, white people have, racism is a white problem, and white people have to fix it.
And I will also say I just introduced the concept of white privilege and power to my students, predominantly white class, and they were shocked and appalled
Were they?
that I would use that language or that I could possibly be applying that to them.
I understand. I've been
So,
doing this
so
for
I
a
can
long time.
ask them to think about it and come back and have more of a conversation on it. But they're pretty sure it's not their fault. So we'll see how it
But
goes.
that's the other thing. As long as we keep talking about fault, we'll never get anywhere. It doesn't matter. This is not about blame.
No, past
It doesn't matter. It's about solutions. It's about moving forward.
Privilege is a very difficult thing to talk about because, like, by its very being, you don't notice it.
Right.
Like, you don't notice it.
It doesn't work if it's not.
The one thing you can do with your privilege, like you can't give it away, you can't sell it, but you can use your privilege. For instance, if I was talking out against sexism, people hear it differently because I'm a male. I'm using my male privilege to talk about the oppression of women. White people need to use their white privilege to talk out against racial oppression.
But the one thing we can do with our privilege is pass it on, good or bad. We pass it on to the children we raise, to the students we educate. You know, this was somehow I woke up or I was born with this privilege I didn't know I had, and didn't even put a label on it. Understand that something set me apart.
Yes,
And so
yes,
we do pass it on, good or bad.
yes, yes.
It's embarrassing.
You got your hand up.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on what Donna was saying about our conversation this morning, the thing that you said that really we need to weave that in is the interrelatedness of the whole history. Slavery to the new Jim Crow to Black Lives Matter, you know, how all of that is interrelated, because so often from the young people we hear, well, why are we still talking about slavery? You know, why are we still over it? But we need to somehow work that into our conversation process of how it all relates.
Yeah, I was talking to some students at Cooley Law School and talking about racism, and they looked at me like I was a Martian. You know, it was their opinion that racism did not exist in America. And I was just some old hippie that was holding on to the 1960s.
Yeah.
And this wasn't white students telling me this.
No.
This was students of color telling me this.
Oh, yes.
Any other comments?
In light of where we are today, and we have such wonderful candidates that are before us, which is to me very indicative of where we are as a nation, that this country, which is supposedly the greatest country in the world, supposedly, that our selection in November, I don't know what's that, it's a bigot and a, I don't know what you call her. But to the point where as people die for the right to vote, you need to vote. So there's this obligatory way of viewing voting. Even when you have Dookie and Dookie,
Yes.
you are feeling obligated because people died and they marched and they won this right, even though it's voted on every 7 years or so. They won this right to exercise this. You have anything to say about, your opinion? You think people should run to the polls? You think people should stay away from the polls? You think people should demand that we're not voting, y'all need to go back and give us a vote, we're voting.
I think we need to vote. My wife passed about 2.5 years ago, and if I mentioned do not vote, I mean, she might pull my leg right now. I agree with you. Our choices are very limited. I think in America we sort of have the delusion that we live in a democracy.
Yes.
We actually live in a republic.
We live in an oligarchy. I'm sorry.
I agree with that.
Democracy is mentioned nowhere in the Constitution or state constitutions or anything. So I just couldn't sit on the sidelines, even though I agree with you. We have Dookie and Dookie.
So question, why didn't we not sit on the sideline? I mean, that's not Dookie.
I just couldn't do it. Like if I sat on the sidelines and Donald Trump was elected, I would feel very, 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 very bad. If Hillary Clinton was elected, I'd feel bad. That's the difference.
Okay, so you.
So it's like I'd rather wake up Wednesday morning and feel bad and not very, very, very.
That's not ready to consider something.
Oh no, I'm never ready to commit suicide.
Well, and there is the opportunity to vote strategically, as it said. So if in the state of Michigan, one of two major party candidates is polling significantly ahead of the other, you do have the option to vote for a better minor party candidate to try to boost that person, that party's vote total in the state, such that it won't make a difference. If it's running really tight and you'd be really, really, really upset if this person won, or just really upset here, you may get the lesser of two evils. But in a state that's polling strongly one way or the other, be it California or Mississippi, protest vote can be cast, I think, with good conscience that you won't wake up the next morning knowing that your vote may have.
So in your opinion, the alternative candidates are more qualified? In your opinion, does a valuable option even exist?
Yes,
For Jill Stein?
the platform of some of the other parties, I think, are certainly closer to the platform of the major parties.
And you could write in Bernie's games. I mean, I think you could vote your conscience, do the homework, and make a decision. And at least then feel as if you have acted, used your right, your privilege here, and voted your conscience.
Yeah, I guess I'm not voting with Bernard either. There's not a candidate out there that I feel enthusiastic about.
We also have
But I feel very, very uncomfortable not voting. It makes me feel that I can't accept that. I can't accept
other races are also incredibly important because no matter who we elect to presidency, if we don't change Congress, as we've seen in the past 8 years, nothing's going to happen anyway. And that's one of the things that we forget, that we're not just voting for the office of presidency. There are other people we need to get out of office. And it seems to me that whatever form that we have to reach some kind of power, we need to use it while we're creating other kinds of ways to make power.
And I will also say that very often we don't do our hometown local elections. We don't know who's running for Because judges can have a huge impact on our daily lives, and in Johnson County in particular, they impact regularly our car insurance. Because it's a county that's very liberal with DWIs, so that means there's a lot of dangerous people on the road, and our car insurance is up. And so we need to know who's doing what, and we need to vote relative to the people who impact our pocketbooks and other parts of our lives every day.
The judges who say that women should keep their knees closed.
There you go.
Politics is local.
Politics.
Is local.
One of the things I think that may be good for us to even begin to think about is having like freedom schools for adults. I'm not talking for, we don't know the Constitution. We don't know the Bill of, I'm talking about adults. You know, certainly there are those of us that are very red on it, but the majority of our communities are voting by what somebody said, told them who they, you know, I like you, and so you said you should vote for so and so. Or we just been Democratic, black folks vote Democratic all the time, so we just, rather than understanding the government, you know, just.
We don't teach civics.
Right, we don't, and so we don't even understand what for the city, what am I trying to say? What is up for the vote? We don't even understand what we should go for with the state. We don't understand that when we go to vote. We don't understand what's there, how that's going to impact our community by how we vote on that. We just don't, and we don't seem to have, y'all correct me, but I just don't seem to see any places where we're gathering people. We say, well, let's go do a voters drive, registration drive. And I was like, would y'all just gather folk while you've registered them? Educate them on what this is about. Otherwise, I mean, you just give them a loaded gun. It's like, this will give you a loaded gun, just go shoot it with, you know, anybody standing, just shoot it. We haven't educated people on what the responsibility is. You say you're responsible, right?
We don't talk about what it means to be, our duties are to be a citizen.
Right. Right. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, civic duty.
Right.
I have a question to throw out. Like at a lot of the functions that I go to like this, there are always very few males. There are very few white males. There are very few black males. How do we get the males there? Anybody got any suggestions?
One of the things that I've seen, and once again, it's what I teach, and so it's what I'm thinking about all the time, is I think that we really have, more than almost anything else in America today, we have a crisis in masculinity. We have a crisis in how we define manhood. One of the biggest problems that I see, for instance, is that most of the mass shooters in America have been white male. And the two things that we don't talk about are their race and their gender. I can guarantee you if they were black people or Latino people or Asian people, the first thing we talk about would be their race. And I can guarantee you that if they were female, the first thing we'd say is bad girls do this. So one of the things that we have to delve into is looking at the concepts, these toxic concepts of masculinity, and how masculinity is linked to a violent kind of power. And so we need to start transforming that concept of power away from violence toward other more productive ways of what manhood would look like. Now, this to me is part of why, what I've seen is that as people of color have worked towards freedom, as women have worked towards their freedom, the groups with privilege have not done any work because we've always, once again, in my first statement, assumed that the work has to be done by the people who are underprivileged as opposed to the people in that system. So the concepts of bringing young men together to have discussions simply not about school, not about anything, but what does it mean to be a man today? Because so many of our young men, white, black, and otherwise, are growing up in homes without men. And so this concept of being able to discuss manhood for men, among a group of men, to me seems to be very critical at this point in history.
I have to agree with that. I had mentioned earlier about my wife passing, and my youngest son, he couldn't cry.
Right.
And I realized that he couldn't cry because he hadn't seen me cry. So I grabbed him and we had a good cry. We do have a problem with that definition of male. Because I was sitting at work one day and I was just, talking, it was a coffee break, and I said, wow, like another male just shot a bunch of people. If there was a bunch of women shooting, there'd be a national inquiry. The whole break room got quiet, but nobody acknowledged what I said, or there was no comment, or it was just quiet. And then the conversation started up again about something else.
Yeah.
It's a taboo. It's a taboo.
We're afraid.
Go ahead.
When we talk about manhood, it's very interesting to me, especially in terms of African American men. I participated in a group of brothers that were meeting, and very angry. In that anger, they were speaking of ways to, just go get a gun and kill everybody, blah blah blah. And they said that's what being a man is about. And my thought was, we need to redefine manhood. And if African American men are looking at white males
That's it.
as their template of manhood, then they're looking in the wrong place anyway.
Yes.
And so there needs to be, no offense, there needs to be another black men on some sort of way for a healing process.
John Wayne won't cut it for black men.
No, yes ma'am. You need to come up with a different definition of man. I think that the greatest feat for a black male, for black men to do, is to come up with their own definition of manhood, because the definition they have makes them crazy because they don't have the power to exercise it. And so therefore they have all this anger and rage going on, and then their whole internalized self-hatred and oppression, and the sisters got the issue too. I really help you because we're looking, because our model is white male too, right? And brother first, you ain't white and you ain't got power. And we are critiquing the brethren for who they are and where they are, and we as a group, a collective, need to redefine what manhood is, and it is nurturing. It is tapping into your feminine side. It is becoming sensitive and knowing your emotions within, being able to feel them, acknowledge them, and live in them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what manhood is, and I don't know what it takes to get that.
It's communication.
Well, and I think that's evidenced a lot in the church, for example. Broadly speaking, more women attend church than men do. And if you look at committee assignments, in my own particular church, finance committee, all men, because that's kind of a man's thing, right? Building and grounds, all men. But the less concrete roles, outreach and pastoral care and hospitality and those kind of things. Some men, but they're predominantly committees of women, because we've sort of made in white America, we've made those roles, right? That women are nurturers and men are whatever we are. So
Detractors and dividers.
and entrusted with with certain things. So so that's just an evidentiary point, confirming what you're saying. I think that's where one instance where it's lived out.
It's very hard. I was thinking about earlier about changing the cultural narrative. Our cultural narrative for males gotta be hard. Gotta be tough. I can't show no emotion. That's what our culture is teaching them. My youngest son that I mentioned earlier, he was a child. I bought him an Easy Bake Oven for Christmas. I got all types of pushback. All types of pushback. It's very hard to push against that peer pressure when you feel like you're doing something right.